A world where evolution has written a new chapter in the story of life. The world is inhabited by very strange creatures, like nothing the Earth has ever seen.
"5 million years in the future. A harsh, bleak desert. But the problem for anything living here isn't the heat, it's the cold. This is an Ice Age desert. Strange animals feed on what little vegetation there is, and on each other. There's little water here, and the strong cold winds blow continuously from the northern ice caps. This desert was once the richest agricultural land in North America. But in this future ice age, 2-kilometer-high ice sheets have reached as far south as Chicago, turning the remaining wheat belt into a cold, dry landscape. 100-kilometer-an-hour winds whip up the sand and dust, scouring the desert. This is a rattleback and her baby. And rattlebacks are among the few animals that can survive in the open during such a sandstorm. The scrubby vegetation doesn't give any real shelter, and the rattlebacks just keep going, struggling on through the wind. The only protection they have are their scales and each other.
There are animals in this desert, but they all have to be specialised to survive the difficult conditions. One of them is the rattleback. The rattleback we have here has evolved from the rattleback we saw in the grasslands of South America.
The grassland rattleback has scales that it uses for display and defense. Rattlebacks evolved from South American rodents, and they're very successful. They quickly spread from their ancestral grassland home into North America. The South American rattleback has strong armored scales as a defense against the predators of the Amazon prairies, but the desert rattleback looks very different. It's not so heavily armored, as there aren't so many big predators in the desert, but its scales give it the perfect defense against sandstorms. They've become smaller and more closely linked, and its face is covered in thick hair, all protection against the abrasive power of sand.
The other adaptation it has is, unlike its ancestor, it's got a large tail. It doesn't have to worry because it hasn't got such big predators who can grab hold of it, and that tail serves as a fat reserve for times of food shortage and also as a water source.
There's no water to drink, and the rattlebacks have to travel several kilometers every day just to find food, and most of that is hidden below the ground. Some creatures, like these sphinx, survive the worst of the desert by living underground. And their world is being invaded. But the rattleback isn't trying to reach the sphinx. All it wants is the tuber, the fleshy root of a plant that grows in the sandy soil. The tuber provides food and water for the hungry rattlebacks.
Animals in this desert have got to find a way to survive. They've got to have mechanisms which will enable them to survive through the year, the periods when there's better food and periods when there's much less. One place where the desert environment is much more secure and predictable is underground. Now here we have a bird which burrows.
So although it may not look like it, this sphinx is a bird.
It's a bird which has evolved from the galliform birds. These are birds like pheasants and partridges and grouse. They're already species which spend a lot of time on the ground.
That group also included quails, the ancestors of sphinx. Today, quails live across most of North America. They can fly, but spend most of their time on the ground. So it wasn't too big a step for them to burrow underground. The quail became smaller, its body lower to the ground, and it lost the power of flight. Its feathers are now much smaller, forming a layer of insulation, just like the fur on a mammal. Very fine feathers around its face keep sand and dust out of its eyes. Its wings have become front legs, so it walks on all fours. But the main role of its wings is digging.
The feathers are made out of keratin, which is the same thing that makes up fingernails and beaks and so on. Keratin is replaceable. It's lightweight, it's tough. And if you adapt those feathers into a sort of spade, then this can be used to dig.
The sphinx dig long tunnels under the desert, scraping away at the soil with their beaks and wings. Birds digging and living in tunnels might seem strange. But today there are birds that do something similar. Puffins nest in burrows that they dig into a cliff top. They have toes on their webbed feet with claws strong enough for digging. A pair of puffins dig a burrow between them, but it only goes a meter or so underground. Kingfishers also dig burrows about the same length into riverbanks. And bee-eaters cover a whole cliff face with their burrow entrances. But all these birds just use their burrows for shelter and for rearing their young. The sphinx, though, spend nearly all their lives in the darkness of their tunnels.
The main reason the sphinx spends so much time underground is because of its food. It's looking for tubers, and by digging its burrows, it's finding the plant food material. It has very special requirements for its colony, and it's evolved a type of mechanism of organizing the colony that we see rarely today. Very rarely in vertebrate animals, but a little more often in insects.
To dig such a big tunnel system, the sphinx worked together. They have a caste system where worker spinks do all the digging to extend and maintain the tunnels. Deeper underground are larger chambers where breeding female spinks, the queens, sit on eggs, most of which will hatch into new workers. All the colony members communicate with each other by singing. They use a high pitch for short distances and a lower frequency for long-range communication around the colony. Spinks live in big colonies because the tubers they feed on are scattered widely across the desert. They can only build a big enough network of tunnels by living in a complex society with a dedicated caste of workers. A similar division of labor does happen today. Naked mole rats live in huge colonies underground, digging tunnels to feed on roots. Most of these mole rats are workers. They will never breed, but instead spend their lives digging tunnels. Naked mole rats dig with their teeth, which keep growing. Spinks dig with their beaks, which also grow continuously, but they coordinate their digging, working like a chain gang. The spink at the head of the tunnel loosens the sand and kicks it back to a spink behind. The next spink passes it back further down the tunnel to yet more spinks. As the tunnel grows, more workers join the chain gang. Eventually, the last spink in line opens a tunnel to the surface and kicks the sand out. These miniature sand volcanoes attract the attention of the hungry rattleback and her baby. On their long search for food, they know that where there are spinks, there are bound to be tubers. So this will be a good place to dig. The rattleback's digging also attracts attention. The attention of death cleaners. Huge, predatory bats with a meter wingspan. Death cleaners fly during the day, cruising over the desert, searching for anything they can find to eat, dead or alive. But they're not after rattlebacks. The rattleback's enthusiastic digging for tubers has exposed those spinks unlucky enough to be close to the surface. The unearthed spinks run for cover, and it's these that the death cleaners are waiting for. On the surface, sphinx are helpless. Just bite-sized snacks for death cleaners.
The death cleaner is basically a carnivorous bat. It will both hunt prey and it will scavenge. So it can eat carcasses if you can find them, but out in this arid environment there aren't too many carcasses. So the other thing it does is it actively hunts following the rattleback. As a rattleback digs up its tubers, it disturbs sphinx come to the surface, and the death cleaner grabs them.
So the rattleback does all the work, digging through the hard desert soil, and the death cleaner gets a free lunch. It might not seem fair, but it happens today as well. This kind of goshawk in Africa is often found hanging around honey badgers. When the honey badger uses its strong paws to dig for food, the goshawk follows it, watching and waiting. It knows the honey badger will dig up insects or small reptiles, which the goshawk will try to steal. In the future, it's a carnivorous bat that's learnt to exploit other creatures. But a giant, predatory bat sounds like a nightmare vision of the future. Yet even today, within the forests of Central America, there are fearsome predatory bats. They're much smaller than death cleaners, but still effective killers of small reptiles and mammals. And it's possible that bats like these could respond to the spreading cold desert by growing much larger. Being big, death cleaners can soar for vast distances over this sparse landscape, searching for the dead, dying, or vulnerable. Bats are mammals, and a warm-blooded mammal flying in a cold desert faces a problem.
The problem it has is that these wings are naked, it will lose a lot of heat through these wings, and so it has a very clever adaptation. It's got a countercurrent system in its wings, so as the blood goes out into the wings, it's cooled, the heat is past the incoming blood to warm it up, so it effectively loses very little heat through the blood. There's cold blood in the wings and it's warmed up as it re-enters the body.
As the sun begins to set, the death cleaners have to return to their roost to avoid the cold of the night, when temperatures drop to freezing. They all gather at a communal roost inside a cave. Hundreds of death cleaners make their way here, returning from their separate hunting trips during the day, flying in from all directions.
The desert is a pretty inhospitable place. The death cleaner will travel long distances looking for food, but it still then may not be successful. But it has a reserve strategy. It goes home to a communal roost, and there some at least of the death cleaners will have been successful in foraging, and so they will share food so that all of them get enough to survive until the next time they can go foraging. Such a strategy is not uncommon. Vampire bats, for instance, do it. Not all the bats in the night will get enough blood to drink. When they go home, those that have been successful pass on some of the food to particularly their relatives, and so it helps them all survive.
Today, vampire bats can drink up to 60% of their body weight in blood in one night. But if they don't feed every 2 or 3 days, they'll die. So vampire bats depend on their social system for survival. With the death gleaners safely in their roost, the desert night comes alive. Underground, the queen sphinx have produced eggs that hatched into reproductive sphinx, new queens and kings. Males emerge first and assemble on display grounds. The females leave the tunnels later, but they don't head for the nearest displaying males. They leave their own colonies to find the display grounds of distant, unrelated males. And when these females reach a new group of males, the males try to impress them with their signaling. A few birds use such communal display grounds today. Black grouse are in the same family as the sphinx ancestors, and they come together in groups, where the males strut around to impress the watching females. The most desirable territories are in the center, making it easy for females to pick out the fittest males. 5 million years in the future, and evolution still works the same way. Male sphinx compete for territories near the center of the display ground. When the female sphinx have made their choice, the sphinx pair off to mate and start a new colony. But this whole display has to be over by sunrise, when the death gleaners take to the skies again. Any sphinx still on the surface have to find cover wherever they can. The survivors will start their new colonies underground, creating new tunnel systems, all out of the way of death gleaners. With the sphinx all safely back underground, the death gleaners will have to look elsewhere. In their search for food, the mother and baby rattlebacks have become separated. The baby rattleback is not too big for the death gleaner's powerful jaws. As they come in for the kill, the baby can only call for help. But its mother has heard it. And the death gleaners won't take on an adult rattleback. Her rattling scares them off. And anyway, They won't risk tearing their fragile wings on her sharp scales. In such harsh, extreme conditions, it's important for the rattlebacks to care for their young. A mother and her baby must stay together for many years until the baby has learned all the tricks it takes to survive in this harsh world. The Sphinx have another solution to living here: to move underground, sheltered from both the harsh climate and predators. But whatever survival tricks evolution has come up with, this is still a hard place to make a living. Freezing winds, blinding dust storms. In 5 million years' time, this certainly doesn't look like Kansas anymore.
This is the world 100 million years in the future. The climate is very warm and very humid all the time. Sea levels are more than 150 meters higher than today, creating vast, shallow swamps where mysterious creatures lurk in the dark water. Not only is life very different now, but the planet itself has changed. The Earth's crust is broken into huge plates like pieces of a jigsaw that jostle and slide over the face of the globe at a few centimeters a year. In 100 million years' time, the continents will be in completely different positions. But this movement is not the only reason the Earth looks so strange. Over millions of years, carbon dioxide from volcanoes has created a massive greenhouse effect, slowly warming up the planet, melting the ice caps, and causing the sea level to creep higher and higher at about 1 millimeter a year. In 100 million years' time, the sea will have flooded much of the dry land. So a combination of moving land masses and a rise in sea level means the globe has changed beyond recognition. And much of what looks like dry land on the globe is actually swamp. This swamp stretches for over 2,000 kilometers.
So at this 100 million year in the future time frame, one of the environments which we're looking at is a huge near coastal swamp. It's partially brackish with the influence of the ocean. It's got a huge amount of fresh water flowing down into it, reminiscent perhaps of some of the great coal swamps of 300 million years ago. Rich in life, teeming in a whole bunch of new adaptations. Very high moisture, high warmth, a steaming tropical jungle, magnified.
It's just the sort of place where evolution can go wild. This mighty beast is a Toroton, and this one is about the size of an elephant. It's descended from a very unexpected ancestor.
Well, the Toroton that roams the Earth in 100 million years' time has evolved from today's tortoises. And you can still see the similarities. It's got a shell, albeit a much reduced shell, and a long wrinkly neck, just a folded skin, and a head that's covered in scales. But there are big differences. It is big, this animal, and its legs have moved from a sideways position like this in the tortoise to underneath the actual animal to support it like four great big pillars as it walks along, just like an elephant's legs.
Any animal bigger than a ton has to support itself with legs directly under its body, not out to the side. Otherwise it wouldn't have the strength to stand up. Once the Toroton had changed its gait to accommodate this, it could get bigger and bigger. The swamp is a massive area where land meets water, and it's here that the creatures of the land meet the creatures of the water. The Toroton spends most of its time reaching up for vegetation in the treetops. But there's something down at ground level that the Toroton hasn't seen yet. A family of swampers. They look like octopuses, and they're descended from octopuses. But this warm, humid world gives these swampers the chance to spend more time on land, at the risk of being trampled by an elephant-sized tortoise. But a swampers can defend itself. The swampers has a deadly bite, a venom so powerful it's lethal even to something as big as a Toroton. The venom is a neurotoxin. It attacks the Toroton's nervous system, first paralyzing it, then suffocating it as the Toroton's lungs stop working. The swampers inherits its deadly bite from its ancestors. Like the blue-ringed octopus, have a venom 10,000 times more powerful than cyanide. Surely a case of overkill. In the future, such a powerful poison has also become a defensive weapon, so the swampers can meet the new challenges of life out on the land.
Along the way, it's had to adapt to a terrestrial existence and be able to actually move around and live out of the water. How does it do that? How does an octopus live out of the water? Now we know that even modern-day octopuses can do that. If you've ever seen one escaping from a marine tank, it'll climb up the corner and down the side and across the floor and back into the sea. So just by pulling themselves arm by arm along, we know that octopuses can deal with a terrestrial mode of locomotion. But one thing that a modern octopus can't do right now is breathe out of the water, and that's one of the major adaptations that these swamp octopuses will have had to have invented.
A specialized lining on the inside of the body cavity has a very rich blood supply, like a lung, so the swampers can breathe in the humid air, to some extent. To move on land, 4 of its arms have become runners, allowing it to haul itself across the mud with the other 4 arms. It may look strange, but there are such halfway creatures today.
A lot of animals have adapted from aquatic habitats to terrestrial ones, and we might think of that transition hundreds of millions of years ago when amphibians first crawled up on land and began their terrestrial existence. But we don't have to go that far back because we have modern examples of that now. Mud skippers, walking catfish.
Mud skippers are very strange creatures. They're fish that can leave the water, pulling themselves along by muscular fins. They can breathe out of water through their skin, and some mud skippers can survive more than 2 days on land. But for a mud skipper to survive in air, it has to keep its skin wet, so it never moves too far from water.
In all those cases, what we see is a tie to the aquatic habitat, either for breathing or for reproduction. And the same is true of our octopus. They can't get very far from the swamp. They're tied to the water that they have to go back to replenish their oxygen supply.
In the future, there's a very good reason for the swampers to venture out onto land, to raise their young. The baby swampers are kept in a nursery inside this plant, where they're fed and protected.
The youngsters of this octopus are perfectly good prey items. But by clustering them all together within what amounts to a nursery inside of this vase, the adult octopuses, which have a venomous bite, can gather around and protect the young octopi. They can bring in food to feed to them and, in a sense, keep an eye on them. You may think that we have just, in this reconstruction, invented a piece of science fiction. No, all we've done is change the players and shown you something that's going on at this very instant on this planet now. If one goes to the island of Jamaica, for example, you can observe a particular terrestrial crab that lives in the funnel-shaped leaves of a pineapple relative called a bromeliad.
The plant traps rainwater, a private pool in which the bromeliad crab raises her young. She even catches food for them. In the future, several related swampers females all work together to raise their young and defend their nursery plant. But there's another reason for raising their young in the plant. It provides the young swampers with something they need.
The plant vase, the water bowl, contains within it, as well as the octopi, a bacterium. And the bacterium is a creature which generates a toxin. As it turns out, the baby octopi are not affected by this toxin and indeed ingest it, and it becomes the basis for their venomous bite as they grow up and become adults. We've discussed what's in it for the amphibious octopus, but in a coevolutionary relationship that has to work in both directions, what's in it for the plant? The plant has timed its flowering so it occurs at the same time when the octopi are nursing their young, which means that when the flower stalk emerges from the center of this large bowl, that no herbivore is going to bother it because there are the guardian octopi around the outside guarding their young. And so the process of fertilization and pollination can take place up on the top of the flower without disturbance, without anything just destroying it.
Every swampers in the neighborhood needs a nursery plant to breed in. This is an intruder, a stranger, another female looking for a nursery plant of her own. But the family won't give up their plant easily. They try to intimidate the intruder, waving their arms, flashing bright colors, showing that they're big enough and strong enough to defend their plant and themselves. The intruder gives up. There's no point in getting into a fight when she's outnumbered. Her only way out is back into the water. But there's a creature here that's found a way around the swampus venom. This is a lurkfish, and it's one of the few creatures that can kill a swampus. In the murky water, the lurkfish can't see very far, but it can sense the swampus as far as 5 meters away. It surrounds itself with a weak electric field and feels the swampus moving through the field. But electricity has a more sinister use. As the swampus gets closer, the lurkfish stuns it with a massive electric shock.
Our lurkfish in this environment is using an electrical sense to detect prey from a distance, but it's also using that same ability to stun prey and immobilize them. Now, currently, that's a very common strategy in similar freshwater fish like electric catfish.
Electric catfish use electricity to kill smaller prey. But the electric eel can pack up to 600 volts, enough to stun a human. The eel senses its prey in the water with a weak electrical discharge, and then releases a much higher voltage to shock and stun it.
Electric fish now generate voltage in small blocks, small muscle blocks along the length of the fish. Each generate a small electrical potential. And like batteries in a series, those muscle blocks along the length build up a bigger and bigger charge.
The lurkfish takes this even further. It's over 4 meters long and has huge numbers of muscle blocks packed along its body, which build up a massive electrical charge. In a matter of seconds, it generates 1,000 volts. By generating such a powerful charge, the lurkfish can stun something as big and venomous as the swampus before it has a chance to fight back. With the swampus dead in the water, the lurkfish doesn't have to worry about the venomous bite. With something as deadly as a lurkfish hiding in the murky water, dry land seems much safer for a swampus. But even here, there are problems. Something is coming. Something big. A herd of torotons. Adult torotons. The one the swampus family killed was only a baby. These are 15 times bigger.
The adults are enormous, the biggest animals that have ever walked on the face of the planet. 120 tons. That's bigger than even the biggest dinosaur. Now, there are lots of advantages about being so big.
They're far too big for swampuses to kill. Adult torotons have no predators. But they're also big because they eat vegetation. And not only so they can reach high up into the treetops.
When you're eating all this vegetation, you need to ferment it to get all the goodness out of it. You need an enormous stomach, a big barrel-shaped stomach, and the bigger the animal is, the bigger its stomach's going to be, so it can extract all the goodness out of all the vegetation over several days.
So size really does matter. Animals this big can just move from tree to tree, stripping off the leaves. But size also creates problems.
Of course, there is one major problem about being so huge, and that's when it comes to mating. Now, modern-day tortoises mate on top of each other, but of course the toroton is far too big for that. The female will not be able to support 120 tons on her back during mating. They've solved this problem by mating back to back. They're simply backing to each other and the face away from each other during courtship and mating. During the actual mating, when they are back to back, the male and the female raise their tail to reveal the cloaca, and the two cloacas actually touch, and that's when the sperm is transferred from one to the other. That's the only physical contact they have during mating.
It takes a long time for a toroton to grow to full size, and they live in family groups, protecting their young for 30 years. But one of their babies is missing, and the herd is restless. They don't know their youngster has been killed by a swampus, so they're not out for revenge. But their search does take them into an area where the swampus are raising their young, and where the baby died. For the torotons, the nursery plant is just another bit of vegetation in the way. One careless kick, and the plant is destroyed. But where are the young swampus? They're old enough now to have been taken to safety, a branch over the swamp, out of reach of the toroton's big feet and the lurkfish. But before they can drop into the water, their mother has to distract the lurkfish, deliberately drawing it away from the babies, staying out of range of its deadly electric shocks. Once far enough from shore, the agile swampus hides herself in the vegetation, keeps still, and so loses the lurkfish. She's bought the babies enough time to find a safe hiding place in the water. A vast swamp where the land meets the water. A rich, fertile place in a constant, warm, wet climate. With such benign conditions, evolution has run riot. New animals have moved onto land and formed a partnership with a plant. A giant fish hunts and kills by electricity. And towering above it all, the biggest creatures ever to walk the earth.